Hey Russ, is that true? All attendees are listen-only mode, or can you open them all up eventually?
I can manually. I don't know who started the broadcast.
You don't know how I started it? So you just said?
Yeah, I got started. I'm not sure. I didn't click it.
I did. I just asked me. I said yes.
Oh, okay.
There's a smaller group. It's a less formal.
Gotcha.
Can you see how
would you like me to? Would you like me to unmute attendees?
Yes, you can. I also want my display to just be the slideshow itself. Do you know how to do that? See how it's actually in a different format right now?
Yeah, you're on like presenter mode, I think.
Yeah. Which is fine, except for I don't. Yeah. How do I get out of that?
If you hit escape, or go to display settings, perhaps. You just under monitors, and you just uncheck use presenter view, and then it should just be.
Thank you. Okay. So we'll start in just 1 minute.
And you said you would like everybody off mute?
Right. And then if we have some issues with sound, then you'll have to help people by muting them if possible.
Okay.
So afternoon, everyone. We're going to get started. We have a small group here, hopefully more a gathering. On this actually very fateful day, the beginning of the last month of summer, but it is the beginning. So happy August 1st. And so this is going to be a really exciting community of practice. I think we're going to have some new people on the call who haven't been on the call in the past, and some people who have been on the call won't be able to join us. But this will be helpful for everybody in all, whatever function you're doing in the COC. But we'll start with introduction. And the community of practice, what we're really fundamentally supporting here is the use of the data tools that many of you already have seen with data maturity training, the data to action cycle training, the URL that you all have. If anyone on the call does not have it, please email me and we'll get it to you. And so we've spent the last 2 sessions looking at that and some of those tools, giving some homework in between, and we also are introducing new tools and new research as we go forward. So it's really to support your own local capacity to use the data tools that have been developed, to use some of the teaching principles that we've actually spent a lot of time learning about and also deploying in the data to action cycle training. Those are really 2 concepts. One is experiential, that we really need to be sharing what we know experientially with our colleagues and not didactically. And also the use of inquiry, really allowing for questions being the answers, really questions that lead us all to solutions. With the fundamental theological principle that we are all, every one of us, teachers, and we are all, every one of us, students. So those are really the fundamental foundation stones that we're building off of every session. We're going to continue this, which we'll talk about at the very end. But in the meantime, let's introduce the Cloudburst team first. We have a great team that has worked on this particular presentation really, really well. It's a wonderful, wonderful tool you're going to get. So for everyone, I think everyone knows me on the call, but I'm Jamie Taylor, doing this community of practice here to really support the work we're doing with data integration and data tools in the community process. And Sarah, want to go next?
Hey guys, nice to talk to everyone again. It's Sarah Kahn, also working with Jamie and at Cloudburst, providing TA around supporting communities to use their data to drive performance improvements at the local level.
Okay. And Kate?
Hi, I'm Kate Marple-Cantrell, also at Cloudburst, also working with Jamie and Sarah, and I am an evaluation specialist, so I am particularly enthusiastic every time I get to talk about exploring data, so I'm very happy to be participating in this conversation today.
Great. And Rachel, we have our fabulous team members outside of Cloudburst working with us. Rachel? Are you on the call, Rachel? Maybe you're on mute, but Rachel Steed is one of our consultants who's supporting us in the community practice. And Andrea Miller is going to be a key presenter here. Andrea?
Hi, everyone. I've been working with Cloudburst as a subcontractor over the past year on various HMIS data and data dashboard initiatives. I also work as a lead in Western Massachusetts for an HMIS initiative and have been working with data in applied settings, mental health, public health, homeless settings for about 20 or so years now. Look forward to walking us through some techniques in Excel to get a flexible handle on our underlying data today.
Great. So if you can see my screen, let's just go down the name. So we'll start with Becky. If you can see the screen here, my screen. So Becky, you want to just quickly introduce yourself, your role, and where you're coming from?
Sure. Can you hear me?
Yep. Yep.
Awesome. I'm Becky O'Mara, and I'm the Program Manager for System Performance and Data Integrity at the Planning Council. We are based in Norfolk, Virginia. We're a regional nonprofit working with at least 5 continuums of care with HMIS and also COC lead for one, and subcontracted with another for that kind of planning work. And we've been part of the statewide data integration for the dashboards with the state of Virginia and our partners there, Cloudburst and Andrea, and all kinds of great new partners that have really been helping us think about how we can use our data to make strategic decisions to improve conditions for people experiencing homelessness in our community.
Yay. Margot?
Hey everybody, my name is Margot Ackerman. I'm the Research and Evaluation Director at Homeward. We're the planning and coordinating agency for homeless services and serve as the COC lead and the HMIS lead in the greater Richmond, Virginia continuum of care. We also administer HMIS for 3 other continuums by contract, and like Becky, we're also participating in a data integration project for the state of Virginia, where we're currently working with 8 continuums of care, which is half of the COCs in Virginia, to put all of our HMIS data into a data warehouse, and we're hoping to go statewide and provide us all with some opportunities to do some data matching or using data on an ongoing basis to make sure that we're serving people most appropriately.
Melissa? Melissa, yep.
Yep, I'm here. My name is Melissa Wall. I am basically a contracted project manager for the data integration project in Indianapolis. I work with the Coalition for Homeless Intervention and Prevention, CHIP, Indy, and our partners, which are many of the managed care entities in Indiana, and they're looking to build a data integrated system for the whole state. So we're right in the thick of things.
Great, thanks. And Michelle? Michelle, on you. What does that mean?
I cannot.
A little simpler.
Yeah, she hasn't entered a pin, so I can't. Michelle, I can't unmute you. So it's grayed out.
Well, Michelle, Well, Michelle figures out her PIN, maybe. Where's the PIN number anyway? If you have it. Do you know where that is? In the meantime, let's go to Norman. Or, Michelle Flint's from Utah, Salt Lake City, head of the road home, and she'll be back in, and she'll have the PIN when she comes back in. And then she can, we'll hear her own voice. Norman? Norman, you're unmuted. I can see that. Are you on mute on your phone? On phone? Okay. But Norman Harris is here. I'm not sure what state you're from, actually. And Trisha?
Can you hear me?
Yep, can hear you.
Okay. Did you say Trisha? Sorry, this is Trisha Davis.
I did, yeah.
Okay. And I've got Michelle Walton and Devin Ship here with me. Joseph Jensen has been our staff that's been participating on these calls, and he is out of town this week.
Okay, great. Norman Harris. Okay, so let's get going. We have a lot to do, actually, so we're going to kick off our PowerPoint here, and we're going to kick off with just like 5 minutes there, if that's possible, checking in, because I think we have mostly new people on this call from last call, because we had homework in between. I know San Diego want to be on this call. I know that Tino from Orlando want to be on the call. He's on vacation. And our Prince George people who were here in force last time are not on the call. So I'm going to pass it over to Sarah to just go over quickly. What we covered is a new tool to be used from our last COP.
So how much time do I have, Jamie, just to make sure we move forward?
I would say 5 minutes there, because most of the people on are not from last time.
Okay, so maybe we'll just recap and give people an opportunity to comment if they have anything to say, but otherwise maybe we could have some space at a future call to debrief on it, because if people weren't here last week, then it probably doesn't make as much sense. So I'll quickly say, so last week we spent some time talking about strategies for building a performance culture, really establishing a performance management program within your community. And this is really about becoming more performance driven, paying attention to outcomes, the impacts of our programs on people's lives, so we can respond better and do more with the resources that we have. A lot of the things that I've already heard you all talk about in terms of your role within your communities today. And so when we talk about performance management, really we're just talking about this continuous process of evaluating and measuring outcomes, and then using that information to design and implement improvement strategies. And so the segment last week had two purposes. So what I think I'll do is I'll point you to the resources that were developed so that we can revisit this, and you'll have the opportunity to look at this tool with your own communities. But first, it was to share this framework that we have shown on the screen now, which is really about a framework for establishing a performance program. The second was to provide communities with a way to formalize a performance program plan. And if communities don't already have an existing performance plan, we provided a template. And the reason that we did that is because I think what we learned from the communities that I've worked with is that when with the actual process of sitting down and developing a performance plan and gaining shared agreement about various aspects of performance management can really lead to greater action among providers and among funders. And so these are the steps that we talked about. I mean, all of these could be a workshop on their own. So it was really just a light touch on the steps that communities need to take and the things to be thinking about. Then we walked people through the template. Is there a way that I can show my screen? Jamie?
So we have Ross.
Show the template? I'll just quickly show it. If you know what we're.
So Ross, can you give that over to?
Yeah, sorry, I was on mute. Yes, I'm shifting.
Okay. So then we provided this template, which was really just to trigger your thinking. If you haven't already thought through various aspects of a performance management plan, to trigger your thinking around things that really support, action and performance improvement. But I think the key here is really about local adaptation to meet your needs at this specific point in time. It's not necessarily and it should be as comprehensive as you need it to be. And it's very likely that you all have a performance plan in place now. But step one is really thinking about those roles and responsibilities, performance roles and responsibilities, and establishing a leadership group and thinking about who are those performance champions, who is going to oversee performance and drive improvement strategies. The next section is really around determining what are the best indicators of success, both at the system level and at the project level. Again, this is a tool that can be adapted to local needs. I know some communities have, a performance plan that's for their whole system and various project types within their system, but other communities break off specific chunks, and they might have a committee that's working on family homelessness, a committee that's working on veterans homelessness, and each of those sort of leadership groups has their own performance plan that they're following in order to track goals and benchmarks. So this is really about just setting out your key indicators of success at the system level and at the performance level, and figuring out what are those targets that we're going to be working towards throughout the year. The third was thinking about your evaluation schedule. So how often are you going to look at the data and then communicate the data back out publicly? So this is important because it's thinking about, often we get in it's getting away from just looking at the data and information once a year at NOFA time to make decisions, but really get in the habit of looking at the data regularly, year round, and then figuring out your communications plan. How is that data then going to be used and communicated back to providers as a way to sort of strengthen commitment, both from funders and leaders, as well as our providers? And within that communications plan, there's key decisions to make, right, about who's going to get the data, what level of data is going to be shared, how is it going to be visualized, what's the most effective mode of communication in terms of electronic media or presentations to committees and key stakeholders and decision makers. And then lastly is thinking about how is that information going to be used to then learn from what's happening in our system and using that information to drive change through technical assistance and capacity building, but also to make funding decisions at, both through federal opportunities and local opportunities. And part of that is sort of then the implementation and engagement strategy as well, and thinking about how do we reframe what performance management means with our communities. And we talked about sort of there's a whole process of engagement with providers around performance management doesn't just have to be about penalizing projects or, defunding projects or just making funding decisions in general. It's also about understanding, hey, what's working well? And as a community, how do we understand that and expand what's working well? What's not working? And as a community, how do we diagnose that and figure out what are the challenges and how do we translate that information into solutions? So that's sort of the recap of what we did last week. I know I'm sort of out of time, but I guess one thing to just raise here is that one of the major challenges that was raised, and that's really hard, and I think it sort of covers a lot of the things that we're talking about today, is that this aspect of our job can be really hard given the expectations that are on COC leaders at the moment. And I just want to note that because I think it's real and it's something that people face every day. You face, as data leaders, you're facing reporting requirements and monitoring data quality and responding to a whole slew of analytic needs and requests that come from all different stakeholders. And I just think it's important to say that and to think about ways that we can kind of unpack that and solution that together to make sure that we do have time for important pieces of our work like performance management. So I'll just leave it there. I know that's 5 minutes, but I guess before we move on, does anyone have any experiences with sort of implementing their own performance plans that would be important to share with others, successes or challenges?
Hey, Sarah, this is Margot. We do have a performance plan that includes both system performance measures and project performance measures, and I'm actually not the one that runs that. Our grants person is the one who actually worked on getting those together and getting them reviewed by our COC board and by our performance improvement committee and everything. And I guess the one thing that I would say about ours is that, you know, they're a little bit dependent on what data you can get from your HMIS in a fairly easy way, because we've actually simplified. At one point we had to run about 130 reports to get all of the performance measures, and then we would still have to do some stuff manually. So we've reduced it from that. But I mean, we end up doing a lot using the COC APR because it's, you know, standardized and everything, and it does have a lot of the metrics that we're interested in. But we're still interested in stuff like related to, you know, how many chronically homeless people are being served in permanent supportive housing programs and that sort of thing. But, you know, I would say that, you know, starting simple instead of starting really, really complicated and specialized and all of that, starting simple is probably the best way to go, because we were going to provide people, all of our state and federally funded partners, we were going to provide them with, you know, a detailed in-person meeting with feedback on their performance every quarter. We had to move that to every 6 months just because it's so much effort to get all the stuff together. So
yeah, that's a really good point.
I'm going to grab it. I think that starting simple is really brilliant, and we're going to segue Ross back to we have 10 minutes for the intro, and then we really want to get you something you can add to your performance management plan, which will be targeted to something that I think everybody is facing, which is the topic of the new thing we're presenting today. So we want to make sure we can jump to that. Ross, if you can give me the screen now. Then what we really want to do is get Andrea time enough. So Andrea, I'm going to have you have this screen in 9 minutes, because this is what we're talking about here is actually something that could take a course, an entire course semester to actually go through. Not the data tool itself, but the framework of this and the complexity of what it means to better understand racial and ethnic disparities in our homeless service system. So what we hope you take away from here is understanding that the experience of homelessness is vastly different for each individual as well as groups of individuals, right? And how do we actually assess that? And as we do assess that, how do we actually embed that in understanding the contextual framework that got us here as a country? How do we better understand structural racism, both in our housing sector and across all the sectors of life, actually? And also, how do we really use tools to drill down to better understand and discover what the magnitude of disparities are in our own communities? And then how do we reach out to next steps with community partners? So we're going to really give you a very quick look at this. This is it. This is a history lesson, but we have to begin with why we're here. Why do we live in such a segregated society? Why is the numbers of people entering homelessness, why the numbers of people of color? I actually heard in Chicago it's 80% people, African Americans, are in their homeless service system in the city of Chicago. And the federal rate, national rate is 40%, though it's 12% in our overall population rate for people who are African American. So we have to really step back and educate ourselves. If we're going to actually go ahead and bridge this, begin to understand this, we cannot just go into the data, which is very, very appealing to just go into our HMIS data with the tool that Andrew's going to share and see where disparities exist. We have to be able to better understand the context of how we got here. And there's a lot of great resources which we give you here. I'm not going to go through all of this, but the reality is that our very laws created the segregation realities that we live in. For 10 years right after Civil War, we had this wonderful time where we actually had shared a community where people, African Americans who were freed slaves, who had the right to vote, were coming in and living integratedly. The Ulysses S. Grant was president then. It was a very, very different time. And then bam, it changed. We had like 10, 11 years of that. And then the Jim Crow laws that we've all heard about came back because of a lot of fear, and white Southern resentment about power. And then people who came into power, what they actually then created is, you can see this 1896 Plessy versus Ferguson in legislation, the racial separation. It was a fundamental grounding for where we are now. And over again, that played out in all sectors of life. But in housing, it played out in multiple ways. And up until 1934, we codified it into law. Our own housing policy codified it into law. But before that, there was housing racially segregated covenants, so that you would have in a neighborhood, you would have a deed with your house that says only white people can live in this house. And that would actually create forever the history of that house. That house could then never, ever be sold then to anyone, a person of color, until that was changed by law. And by law, we actually had that in place, and we changed it by law in the late 1930s. But then we got this de facto segregation policy, which is really based on our very first housing administration, FHA, that came in and we needed to develop a housing market. And they developed we all bought our homes right now. Any of us who own homes, we buy our homes under mortgages. In 1934 was the first time that came into play. The federal government created that capacity where mortgages and home ownership would be developed based on mortgages. Those mortgages were given out based on what we know is redlining from a map that was created by this whole Federal Homeowners Loan Corporation across our country in 233 cities. And they had a framework color of risk for where you would actually allow people to purchase mortgages and where you would disallow that. So the red section were where people of color lived, and they were not allowed to actually get mortgages. It was codified into the way the housing mortgages were given out. And over again, that created really the discrimination and segregation that we're living with now across the state. And so there's a lot of wonderful resources. The Color of Law is a new book out this past year. It's phenomenal. I recommend it for anyone. And you don't have to read it consecutively, but it's such an eye-opener of what really is, again, a forgotten history of how our government segregated America. And the resources that are actually will show later at the end of the slides, resources that summarize some of this are under the Center for Social Innovation's work that they've done with the Spark report. So there's a lot of linkages that we're going to share with you that you have your own access, but you have to understand this context if you're going to start looking at how and why there is such racial disparity and ethnic disparity in our homeless service system. So this is required, really. It's required because when you're promoting data and findings, you have to understand how to begin to dialogue about that in a deeper way, in a deeper context. So our reality, as we all know, is still here, as we talked about, and that what started way back in the Jim Crow time of our history and policy is still persistent today. And we could see it in any of our urban areas, and we can also see it in our suburban areas. That's what we created. So the Spark report we'll send out to you. Many of you have already seen it, I'm sure. It came out just recently in 2018, focused on supporting partnerships for anti-racist communities, but they focused on HMI's data, and they analyzed it in 6 communities here. And their findings were revealing what is reality that we've all actually known, and heard about over the years, but now there's a very big focus from USICH, from HUD, from the National Alliance Conference on better understanding what this phenomenon is and contextualizing it. And we are supporting this in the framework of the data analysis, and what you can do with your HMIS data is one part of your beginning exploration. So what's really critical here to take away is, number one, to understand, take the time to understand the contextual context of our racially divided, segregated housing world that we live in, and how and why that happened. 2, to also understand in the data that you're going to be looking at, it's one part of the data streams. We want you to be thinking about also, again, the context. How do you actually measure contextually what's happening in your community that's feeding into this? not just the historical context, but also the broader context of your existing eviction rates, incarceration patterns, and also the process. It's understanding process, context, and outcomes are really important. So we're framing it out as a three-legged stool in how you approach this. We're going to show you a way where you can actually look at measures in this comparative lens. Also, the time series lens is something you can do yourself with your data, looking back over time and comparing the changes over time. And what we're promoting overall is the need to use a data analysis findings to ask harder and deeper questions about the racial disparities that you will likely find in your own community. These are broad exploratory questions we're promoting because that's what you want to do with your partners and key stakeholders, is begin with questions. And not all the questions can get answered with your existing data or existing data sources, but you want to promote that inquiry in your community and with your partners. So I'm going to pass it over to, in 10 minutes, you just got this incredible history lesson that I paid a lot of money for, actually, for a housing policy class, I have to say. So you guys are now going to get a wonderful toolkit from Andrea that's very applicable to what you can use now with your data. Andrea? Ross, could you get the PowerPoint over to Andrea also?
Right.
Yep.
So we need to share my screen.
Yep.
Yeah, you should be presenter now.
Great.
So it says you're presenter, Andrea. Did you press share screen? Yep. Voila.
I did. So I think I'm good to go. I'm here, right?
Yep.
You're seeing my mouse. Okay. Thank you. So what we're going to do right now, what I'm going to do is demonstrate for you how to use Excel for some ad hoc reporting in order for you to be able to take a look at disparities at your local COC level. The approach is a 5-step strategy, starting with us devising a data analysis plan, prepping and transforming our data, analyzing our data, which in Excel is going to happen through pivot tables, visualizing our data so that we can then roll everything up into a nice 2-pager for distribution to stakeholders, which can happen as a PDF. We're using Excel because of its expediency. Some of you may have statistical packages that you use, or you may be great at building reports, canned reports in your HMIS, but when wanting to do some ad hoc reporting, Excel can be a great choice as a tool. It doesn't require any special software, any knowledge of syntax, any special subscription. So it can be a go-to sort of Swiss Army knife that integrates all of the components of that 5-step process that we just took a look at. This is a screenshot actually of our sort of before and after within Excel, going from the sort of A to Z functionality of going from a draft data analysis plan in Excel, working with our data, which we'll take a look at in a minute, and producing a nice final report for posting and distribution. So first I wanted to, before going into Excel, I just wanted to mention the framework that we should use when thinking about this measuring and assessing disparities at the local level. The first thing we'd want to do is take a look at population measures, especially with regards to the prevalence of homelessness among and between racial and ethnic groups, and what that means in terms of the representation of those groups in our homeless population, and how that then compares to our general, hopefully local population. It's through that comparison that we can reveal whether disparities exist, and if so, how narrow or broad they are. We also want to think about process measures. This includes things related to accessing services and the type of services received, even the quality of services received. In HMIS data, it feels like it's mostly related to time-related variables. For example, time from coordinated entry assessment to housing placement, or time from rapid rehousing program enrollment to move-in date. Those are terrific measures when thinking generally about the service delivery system and whether or not disparities exist in our measurement of those processes. And lastly, of course, we want to take a look at outcomes, mostly short-term outcomes when thinking about HMIS data. For example, are there disparities in outcomes with regards to exiting to pH? So that's the framework. And then let's go into Excel. This workbook will be provided to you. It includes all of the 5 steps as tabs that I just described. So it starts off here with our data analysis plan. A good data analysis plan, it can be really brief in the case of ad hoc reporting, but we want to include a very concrete description of our key questions. With regards to this data project, what exactly are we trying to reveal right now? Once having very clearly defined our key questions, we can think about who is the target population, meaning from whom do we need to grab data from in our HMIS, what's our preferred time frame at this point, what is our set of independent versus dependent variables, what variables do we need specifically from the HMIS data set, which ones might we need to create in order to do our analysis, what type of basic prep do we want to conduct, and what else do we want to know ahead of time with regards to transforming our data set. The goal here is simply creating a roadmap for your own self when doing ad hoc reporting so that you can grab the data you need, do the analysis you need, and produce the output you need for a nice report, without having to get tripped up along the way, which is pretty easy to happen when working with HMIS data. Once we have a good data analysis plan in place, of course, we grab our data, we pull our data. You're looking right now at a dummy data set that was based on an HMIS data pull. So the assumption here is that you'd usually be pulling structured data from the HMIS, and so predefining the fields of data. This data set it's a short data set consisting mostly of universal data elements. However, what you see is I've color-coded column headers in this light yellow with regards to the fields of data that I needed to create. So they include indicators, sort of yes, no, variables that I need for my analysis, plus some recodes based on VLOOKUP formulas. In this data set, what I provided is in these highlighted columns, you'll see the formulas that underlie the recoding. So for example, after I've done some basic data cleaning in the data set, I need to first deduplicate my data set. I need to remove exact duplicates, which in Excel I would do by using the remove duplicate function. But then I need to identify duplicates of folks who came in and out during my time frame. And I can do that by using this formula here, an equals if formula. It's included in the column of data, but also included as a comment attached to the column so that it wouldn't get lost along the way. So if you'd like to use this approach, that formula is available for you to copy and paste in with very minor modification, meaning that you need, of course, to point toward the specific column where your ID is located that you want to duplicate. In this data set, I used a COC ID instead of a full name, but typically for me, I'd be working with full names that are coded a little bit further. So I duplicate my data so that I have an index visit for the time frame, I proceed to create the additional indicators that I need and recodes that I need. In this data set, what's especially important is coding for race and ethnicity. So here what you see is I've coded it in multiple ways so that I can achieve maximum flexibility when actually looking at the data. Here is my ethnicity column, from HMIS. Here is my race. I've created a few simple indicators. Is this person Hispanic? Yes or no. 1 for yes, 0 for no. Is this person not white or white only? Yes or no. I created a simple calculation, adding up this indicator, race, plus this indicator for ethnicity. That lets me know, is this person a person of color? Yes or no. I then can recode with a simple equals if formula, which again is copied into the column comment field. And that lets me then, once I get into my analysis, think about this and look at this however is most appropriate and worthwhile, as I'm doing the analysis. I have...
Andrea?
Yeah?
Andrea, hang on 1 second. I know you're going fast for some people. Some people are following, and other people you're going fast for. But know that this is built in the workbook that you will get. Those formulas are there. And 2, if you have questions, because we have to get through a lot, if you have questions, Andrea can answer them. We can also set up an additional TA call. So don't worry about it. If you have questions you can ask right now, you'll be able to ask them after. That's all. Okay, thanks, Andrea.
Thank you. I mean, I'm going really fast. So I think what I was hoping to do is just show this to you sort of as a demonstration of what is possible in Excel. And if it feels like a strategy you want to pursue, then it's definitely worth thinking about and talking about a little bit more, or setting up some TA, that sort of thing. I've basically used 2 main formulas here, if formulas and a VLOOKUP code, which is when, for example, I recode destination as provided to me through HMIS into destination type, or is this a successful exit? That is an exit to PH, yes or no. I've done this according to HUD Programming X for APRs, but again, according to what's called the VLOOKUP code in Excel, that's provided in the workbook, and the lookup codes themselves are provided. So here's a whole bunch of lookup codes, including, for example, the codes for recoding for age groups, for recoding for destination type, and for successful exit. A really terrific strategy in Excel is that you can build up your own library of these types of lookup codes, so that whenever you're downloading data and want to conduct some analyses, you have them on hand for copying and pasting into your workbook, and then can pretty quickly do the recoding you want to do the analysis you want. So once I've prepped and transformed my data in these fundamental ways, the analysis in Excel happens through pivot tables. I've included slicers in the pivot tables, which is Excel speak for quick and easy filters for all of my tables or any tables that I've attached to the filter. What I've done here is actually go progressively from sort of the first data question through the last data question, starting with what is the proportion of folks who are homeless by race and ethnic categories? First, what I did is just take a look at my general data set. I did that in this case by just looking at folks by project status and household status to get a sense as to what my overall sample size is for this particular time frame. You'll notice that in this particular dummy data set, I only had emergency shelter data and transitional housing data. So for this type of analysis, we might also like to include rapid rehousing data and permanent housing data, but I did not have it on hand. I then break down my folks in my sample by race when I, oh, so that's funny. What you're not seeing right now is the actual variable list underlying the pivot tables. In your own version of this workbook, when you click on a pivot table, the field list comes up. That shows you how this table was built. Pivot table, we actually have a nice tutorial with regards to how to create pivot tables that we provided at the Data Institute that we did in the spring. So we could provide that to you if you're not familiar with the use of pivot tables. This demonstration is to show you that through the use of pivot tables, we can fairly quickly, drill down to many levels of information, especially including the level of information related to race, ethnicity, conduct a crosstab so that we can even then combine the two variables if we want to look at an overall factor related to are these folks people of color or are they white only? Again, like I said, I then move progressively through looking at folks who are homeless for the first time and are there disparities there. Along the way, this is what I do personally, like as I'm generating pivot table output, I'm noticing like what is starting to emerge for me, what am I seeing initially. If something jumps out at me, then I want to do perhaps a couple of additional tables to look at it in an even more clear way. This third column is related to length of stay in shelter, which in this data set sort of stood in for my process-related measure. And any time-related measure that you might want to look at, you could look at according to your category of interest, in this case according to race, and then average length of stay. Here's our average length of stay overall, 165 days. Here are our two groups who are above that average length of stay. So again, I'm sort of place marking what's emerging as I do this analysis. I'm thinking perhaps I want, yeah?
Andrea, technologically, are other people seeing the pivot table tab? Because I'm not. I'm still seeing data tab. But are other people seeing it?
No.
No, this is Sarah, I'm not seeing it.
Yeah, so Andrew, the pivot table, I think you're on the pivot table tab, but we don't see it on the screen.
I think you may have paused your screen sharing, perhaps.
Do you see it now?
Now it's just the welcome screen. For the
Pardon me?
webinar. No, for the whole webinar.
No, we don't see it yet. Ross, can you walk her through this technologically? This is not my bailiwick, but can you walk her through what she should be doing?
Now I am not actually, Andrea, I'm not seeing you here as being on the webinar anymore.
Okay. Andrea, is it your internet up there in the woods in Massachusetts? Is it your internet connection that wasn't moving? I bet. So, Kate, you want to open up the work plan on your computer, and we could have Kate flip through it, the work plan. Is what I propose.
Sure,
we only
yeah.
have about eight minutes left, but Ross, why don't you give Kate, and Kate, you can go to the pivot table tab, and she'll follow you, Andrea, on where you are. So Kate's going to be the presenter.
Okay.
Whoa, look at that. Now we're seeing something.
What
are we looking at? Pivot tables with slicers. Yeah, we're seeing pivot tables with slicers now. Yeah.
Great.
So I think we had kind of talked a little bit through the first and the second column. We were talking about the third column as a process measure. Andrea, you're here, right? So we can pick up from there.
Yep. So I was, right, we're at the third column. Again, the idea here is that I've demonstrated for you and provided a sample of how to create these pivot tables and what they could potentially include, and how to think through even being progressive in the approach with regards to creating the pivot tables. Pivot tables are mostly always frequency tables and crosstab tables, but can be easily manipulated in Excel to produce a lot of different types of output for us. With regards to length of stay, in the data set, I coded for long-term stayers and rapid exiters in case that's a particular way that my COC habitually or preferably likes to think about length of stay, along with the average length of stay. The same could be true for other time-based measures. And then lastly, the last set of pivot tables is related to housing outcomes, where first I look at exits overall by race, then look at exits by type, which produces a fairly crowded crosstabs table. So then I break it down further to look at exits according to successful exits. Again, I guess you wouldn't have seen this before, but highlighting along the way for my own self what's starting to emerge for me as places of measurable disparities. Once I've produced all of the pivot tables that feel relevant to the report that I'd like to generate regarding this issue, I can then move on to using the pivot table data to create some charts in Excel using the charting features in Excel. I, for example, create tables of my data where I've pasted in the pivot table information. So, of course, Kate, we're on now the charting tab, right?
Yes. Yeah.
Can you see that?
Yes.
Okay.
It's all good. 10-minute warning, Andrea.
Yep. So from within Excel, perhaps you've used Excel to create charts. We copy over our data from the pivot tables into this new tab, where we're just going to start doing a bunch of charts until we feel satisfied that we have something that is a good visual presentation of the data and the observations that we're seeing in the data. In Excel, you do that by going to Insert and Insert Chart. We're not reviewing that now. The idea is to show you, again, how within one tab you can just start compiling the information, the output that you'd like to include in your report, and start creating your charts along the way. And you see that in this tab. So Kate, like if you were to just scroll down through this tab, you see that I've sort of just thrown in a bunch of charts. Sometimes I try it one way, sometimes if it feels like it's a successful presentation of the data, then maybe I pause to also start revising some of its design features, coming up with a color scheme, that sort of thing. Once I have these, I can copy and paste them into my report. So we can go to the next tab, which is the report template. I often do this almost right away. Yep.
And I want to say in the charts, because you have a lot of charts, you're not going to use all of them, but I really appreciate how you had that description where you have a data statement going to that with that chart. I really appreciate that because it's not all about the report, but that's to me really important because you're really spending more time, and when you have to write about it, you're having to decipher it. So I really want to point that out. I think that's an excellent best practice there.
And when generating pivot tables, you start to see things and it's a pause and it's like, oh, look at that. That you saw in this workbook I've highlighted with just red text. Then you get to the charting and you actually start coming up with some ways to see the data visually. And then it's a much longer pause because then it can be, oh, wait, look at that. And that's where sometimes I even do stop right there and then to put my thoughts into words in terms of, how to succinctly describe what I'm seeing from that data-driven point of view. which then, of course, totally facilitates moving on to the reporting. The first tab here, the report template, I was mentioning I sometimes do way up front. What I've provided for you here is one of my general templates where I start with an overview of the data and the data project, its parameters. I then include the descriptives that are relevant to the data set. If you scroll down, I might include a chart with regards to trends, with regards to the population of interest. I then, on page 2, summarize key findings, meaning outcomes, you know, things like successful exits to housing. And lastly, sum everything up in a very brief outro. Doing it this way lets me literally like drop in, copy and paste in the charts that we just did on the previous page, and absolutely facilitates, you know, getting this done in a way that's efficient and leads to a pretty nice report. In this case, if we go to the report mockup tab, I've included sort of a variation on a theme there, where we can take the data that's been generated in the pivot tables and then in the visualizations and start drafting up some language with regards to what was revealed in the data, with a general guide, you know, in terms of what would the text include theoretically. There's very little text in this sort of brief report. You know, we are presenting data and what's been observed in the data, and then presenting context in the languaging of what we're including. We may include charts, we may include tables, and of course the format itself can be changed, but by coming up with a basic format, then the task only becomes dragging and dropping in the visualizations and, you know, filling in the data blocks with, so the text blocks with some basic summations of what the data reveals. That from there then is saved as a PDF. Yep, and we're done, because that then gets saved as a PDF and can be distributed or, you know, to your stakeholders or posted at a website. The only thing I didn't mention is that in this case, in this particular data project, you see a tab for secondary data sources. A part of looking at disparities absolutely looks at comparing, you know, the folks in the homeless population by race and ethnicity to folks in the general population by race and ethnicity. There's a few different places to get that information, depending upon how exactly you want to report upon that information or compare that information. So the links are in the PowerPoint for you, and then there's also additional info about those links in the tab called Secondary Data Sources.
Yay. Okay, we don't have time for questions. We just have to finish up the PowerPoint. We have a couple more things. And Andrew, I already consent that people will have questions. Please email us. We'll set up a time for one-on-one kind of TA on this, because this is a very important tool. You can see a lot has gone into this, and it's, we want it to be used. That's the whole point of doing it. Thanks, Kate. Essentially, we want to remind you that this is all about exploratory data, that you then go work with your community stakeholders to both look at additional data sources that are there, as well as potentially explore a partnership with a researcher for deeper analysis, because questions are the answers that point us to solutions, and then really using it as a directional tool to develop the quality improvement strategies, right? So next slide. These are some of the resource links we've talked about here. The case for reparations, Rachel, who's on the call, put together these resource links. She highlighted that in yellow. And I believe that's because it's such a powerful article. It's been referenced in other articles. The Spark report you're going to get is a very good report. It's, again, focused on racial inequities and homelessness. The Center for Social Innovation, that link has a lot of links that were really, really helpful for you. And then the secondary data set links are the ones that Andrea just was speaking to. So there's a lot of rich resources underneath here, and we really urge you to go into these again as you move forward on this. This is a long-term There's nothing, no short-term answers on this one. It's a long-term commitment to understand together with your communities. Next slide, which I think is our last one. So we want to continue these. We want to do a quick raise of hands. Do people want to meet in August, or do we just jump to the September one? And we're also going to make it longer. This is clearly an hour is not going to cut it. We're going to make these an hour and a half. But should we just jump to September, or should we do August? I think in a good Quaker condition, if anyone has a strong opinion, go ahead and voice it. Oh.
This is Margot. I'd like to do August because I'm going to be on vacation in September.
Oh, okay, beautiful. Okay, so there we have it. We're going to do August. That's our next date here. And we don't have time for questions. We don't have time for anything except a really, really, really huge a round of applause for Andrea's great work on this and the product, and also Rachel's great work on resources, and Kate's great work in getting background pieces, and Sarah's great work on the performance management stuff. And so what we're doing again is not modeling the way we want you to do any of this, but that we're really modeling everybody here is a contributor in this process. We'll get back to this. If you guys want it, we can actually do a follow-up call because this was so rich here, and invite everybody in, all those who were here and all those who weren't. But for now, thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you. And we hope this gives you tools for moving forward on this very critical issue. That's for you, Andrea. Yay. Okay.
Yeah.
Bye. Bye, all.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye. Thank you.